Is it the greatest archaeological discovery of all time or a gigantic leap of faith? An Australian scientist is part of a team convinced it's found the remains of Noah's Ark.
A team of archaeologists has just left a mountain in eastern Turkey, carrying something they can't quite explain. And what they've uncovered is now sparking debate across the globe. For generations, people believed that Noah's Ark lay hidden at this very location. But for just as long, it was dismissed as nothing more than a story. Something passed down, not proven. Then everything changed. The researchers brought in advanced equipment, scanning the ground, collecting samples, and lowering cameras deep beneath the surface. And what came back didn't resemble ordinary rock at all. Right now, they're being extremely cautious with how they describe it, but the data, the soil composition, the shapes buried underground, all seem to point towards something that shouldn't be possible. So what exactly did they find down there? Let's take a closer look at what they were seeing, because once you do, it's hard to forget. And what they're seeing might change everything. So if you want to see what they discovered next and decide for yourself what's really hidden beneath that mountain, make sure to subscribe and stay with us. The site lies along the slopes of Mount Tendurek, a steep and unforgiving volcanic region stretching across the rugged landscape near the far more famous Mount Ararat. This isn't a place people casually explore. It's isolated, dry and harsh, the kind of environment where something could remain hidden for thousands of years without drawing attention. And yet for generations, locals have pointed to one specific formation, repeating the same story told by those before them. There was always something unusual about it, a long, distinct shape embedded in the earth. From above, that shape becomes even harder to dismiss. Over decades, aerial images consistently captured the same outline, a nearly perfect oval stretching over 500 feet, pressed into the ground like the imprint of something massive that once rested there. Not just roughly oval, but strikingly precise, with one end tapered and the other rounded. Its proportions resemble a vessel far more than a natural rock formation. Eventually, it became known as the Durupinar site. For years, it was simply an oddity, something intriguing, but not necessarily groundbreaking. But think about its size for a moment. Over 500 feet long. That's not a small boat or fishing craft. That's a structure comparable in length to a skyscraper laid on its side, sitting on the slope of a volcano, nowhere near any ocean. What could possibly create something like that in a place like this? Then came a new kind of investigation. This team didn't rely on digging or guesswork. They brought technology capable of reading beneath the surface. Ground-penetrating radar, 3D subsurface imaging, tools that allow scientists to map what's hidden underground without disturbing it. They carefully scanned the entire formation, section by section, expecting to see nothing more than natural chaos. Fractured rock, uneven layers. The randomness typical of geological formations, because nature is messy. But what appeared on their screens told a very different story. Instead of disorder, they saw long, straight lines, clean angles, layered sections, stacked in a way that looked almost architectural. Repeating compartments arranged with a consistency that erosion simply doesn't create. And these patterns weren't near the surface. They extended deep below, between 8 and 20 feet underground, far beyond the reach of wind or weather. Whatever was down there didn't look accidental. It looked constructed. Pause and think about that. Nature can carve valleys, raise mountains, even reshape continents, but it rarely produces straight lines or perfect angles. Repeating sections at consistent depths, Those are signs of deliberate design. And then things became even more unsettling. The measurements began to align. The dimensions of this buried structure closely matched descriptions found in an ancient text written thousands of years ago, not loosely, not vaguely, but closely enough to leave the researchers standing there in silence. At that point, they shifted from observation to testing. They collected soil samples from within the formation and compared them to samples taken just outside it, and the results didn't match. The soil inside contained a higher level of organic material, the kind of chemical residue left behind when something once alive, like wood, decomposes over an immense period of time. And according to the Book of Genesis, this is exactly where Noah's Ark was said to come to rest, in the mountains of Ararat. So, could this actually be Noah's Ark? Even the vegetation growing over the formation seemed slightly off, just different enough from the surrounding landscape to raise questions, almost as if the ground itself was hiding something it couldn't completely conceal. And that wasn't all. Scattered across the area were massive stone slabs, taller than a person, each with carefully carved holes near the top. Some researchers looked at them and immediately thought of anchor stones, the kind used to stabilize a massive vessel against powerful currents. But that raises an obvious question. Who made them? And when? The locals didn't have an answer. They simply repeated what had always been said. Those stones had been there for as long as anyone could remember. For generations, families living near the mountain passed down small, puzzling details like these. Strange objects appearing after heavy storms, unusual patterns in the soil, pieces of wood that had hardened into something like stone, discovered impossibly high above sea level. Individually, none of it proved anything, but together, they formed a pattern, just enough to keep the mystery alive century after century. Now stay with me, because this is where the story shifts. From unusual to almost impossible, the team began drilling. They sent down specialized cameras designed to navigate tight, underground spaces, fully expecting to find nothing but darkness, dirt, and lifeless rock. But what appeared on their monitors sent shockwaves far beyond that mountain. Inside those hidden cavities, there was structure, patterns that repeated, sharp-edged voids, divisions that didn't resemble natural geology at all, but instead looked like rooms, compartments, like the interior of something built with purpose, something designed to hold and separate. Now let's be clear, just as the researchers themselves were, this is not definitive proof. It's not a final answer or a historical confirmation. And the team made that very clear again and again, because that kind of caution was missing from earlier claims tied to this story. They weren't standing there declaring, "We've found the Ark." They were saying something far more careful and far more unsettling. We don't have an explanation for this, because the formation doesn't behave like ordinary rock. The soil doesn't behave like typical soil. And whatever lies beneath doesn't resemble a natural accident. So now you're left with a question that refuses to go away. There is something structured, buried inside a mountain, that should contain nothing but volcanic stone. The obvious question is what it is. But the deeper question, the one that has haunted people for generations, is this. What if this isn't the first time someone has stood here and believed they found it? Because long before modern technology, before radar scans and underground imaging, someone else made that exact claim, and he dedicated his entire life to it. Almost no one believed him. Before we follow him up that mountain, let me say this. If stories like this are why you're here, the kind where evidence and legend begin to blur, take a moment to subscribe. It's the easiest way to make sure you don't miss the next discovery when it surfaces. Now, back to the mountain. We are standing on Noah's Ark. Can you believe it? That's what he claimed. His name was Ron Wyatt. And on paper, he had no reason to be part of a story like this. He wasn't an archaeologist. He wasn't a historian. He was a nurse anesthetist from Tennessee, a man whose job was to put patients under before surgery, then go home at the end of the day, until one moment changed everything. He saw a photograph. It showed a strange, boat-shaped formation high in the mountains of eastern Turkey, and something about it locked onto him, something he couldn't ignore. Most people would have looked at it once and forgotten it. Wyatt didn't. He kept staring, and the longer he looked, the more certain he became. A quiet conviction settled in, one that would eventually take over his life. He believed he was looking at the remains of Noah's Ark, and from that moment on, he made it his mission to prove it. But to understand Ron Wyatt, you have to understand this. He wasn't chasing just one mystery. He was chasing all of them. For over 2 decades, he poured everything he had into these pursuits. His time, his money, and eventually his credibility. He traveled across deserts, climbed mountains, explored ancient sites, always searching. Over the years, Wyatt claimed to have uncovered nearly 100 biblical artifacts: the Ark of the Covenant, Noah's Ark, Goliath's sword, even the original 10 Commandments. To some, he was a real-life Indiana Jones, someone chosen to uncover lost pieces of sacred history. But to the scientific community, he was something else entirely. A problem, because none of his claims were ever verified using accepted archaeological methods. In the late 1970s, Wyatt returned again and again to Turkey, driven by a belief he couldn't shake. He said he found petrified wood, metal fragments, rib-like rock formations, massive carved stones he believed were ancient anchors. To him, the pieces fit perfectly, but experts saw something very different. Not a ship, just natural formations shaped by erosion and time. Critics pointed to Wyatt's lack of training and evidence, saying he saw what he wanted to see, and maybe there's truth in that. Because he lacked one thing: the ability to see beneath the surface. No advanced tools, no subsurface data, only belief. He died convinced, but unproven. And he wasn't alone. For centuries, people believed something was hidden in those mountains. Even Flavius Josephus wrote that Ark remains once existed. The idea never disappeared. It was passed down. Across nearly 200 cultures, flood stories repeat, different details, but the same event. Then comes something striking: a Babylonian tablet describing a boat so precisely it was rebuilt, and it floated. Not just myth, instructions, but the search, a pattern of failure, stories of wood and ice, shapes in glaciers. Always the same ending: claim, excitement, doubt, silence. And the mountain keeps its secret. It looks deliberate, like the outline of a massive ship embedded in the earth. He's flown over countless ridges before. None of them looked like this. He photographs it, unsure if the camera will even capture what he's seeing. But it does. The images go public. And suddenly, attention explodes. For a brief moment, it feels like the mystery might finally have an answer. Then investigators arrive. They measure, they analyze, they study the terrain. And their conclusion: natural formation. Just mud, lava, and water shaping the land into something that only looks meaningful. And just like that, the excitement fades again. The place that would later carry Durupinar's name falls silent. But the pattern doesn't stop. 1908, recounted decades later by a man who never let the memory go. George Hagopian claimed that when he was a boy, his uncle took him deep into a mountain gorge, lifted him up, and placed him on top of something enormous, a wooden structure, half buried in ice. He said he stood there, a child walking across the surface of the ark itself, that he touched the wood with his own hands, wood that felt almost like stone. He described it as the most real moment of his life. It's an incredible story, but the more closely you examine it, the more it unravels. The timeline doesn't quite match. His age raises questions. The journey he described would have been brutally difficult, even for a fully equipped adult, let alone a child. And then there's the location itself, a gorge formed by a violent volcanic eruption and earthquake in 1840. Not exactly a place where ancient wood would survive. Still, expedition after expedition followed his story into those mountains, and every single time they came back empty-handed, and the cycle continues. US intelligence photographs capture a long, dark object protruding from the snow on Mount Ararat. Ark hunters dive into the images, convinced they're looking at something extraordinary. A satellite image sparks another wave of excitement, another elongated ship-like shape appearing where it shouldn't. But shadows can deceive. Rocks can resemble things they're not. And once again, nothing holds up. Then, in 2010, a media team based in Hong Kong releases dramatic footage. They claim they've found it. Inside Mount Ararat, wooden chambers, preserved and hidden. Proof at last. For a few brief moments, it dominates headlines worldwide. And then, it falls apart. People started noticing things that didn't add up. Straw that looked too fresh. Cobwebs untouched in a place that was supposed to be flooded. Soon, doubts turned into accusations. The entire scene may have been staged, built like a set, with help from a local guide. And just like that, another claim fell apart. Some researchers moved on from Ararat completely. Bob Cornuke followed a different lead to Mount Suleiman in Iran, pointing to beam-like rocks and fossilized clams as evidence. But in the end, that's all they were. Rocks and clams. Worse, the location itself didn't match, hundreds of miles away from where the original texts point. Others suggested Mount Kudi, and the cycle kept repeating. New claims, big headlines, fading answers. For centuries, it always ended the same way. Stories, blurry images, strong belief, but no solid proof. That's why radar changed everything. For the first time, this wasn't about shadows or guesses, it was data. And while some kept searching the mountains, others looked somewhere completely different, down into the Black Sea. Because when Robert Ballard, the man who found the Titanic, entered the search, people paid attention. In 2012, he revealed a different idea. Not a ship on a mountain, but an entire world lost beneath water. Once, the Black Sea was a freshwater lake, surrounded by early human settlements. Then the seas rose, and when a natural barrier at the Bosphorus finally broke, salt water rushed in with overwhelming force, flooding everything in its path. Imagine standing there, watching the water rise without stopping, running, surviving, remembering. A story begins, passed down, generation after generation, until it becomes the flood that ended everything. Ballard went looking for proof, and deep below the surface, in oxygen-starved water, where nothing decays, his team found it. An ancient shoreline, perfectly preserved, dating back around 5,000 years, right when many flood stories are believed to have begun. His conclusion? It was probably a very bad day. Does it prove Noah existed? No. But does it suggest a real devastating flood that shaped human memory. More and more scientists think so, and as always, the moment that idea took hold, the debate split again. Some called it a true catastrophe, powerful enough to inspire every flood story that followed. Others believed it happened more gradually, a steady rise rather than a sudden disaster. And some insisted it was so slow it wouldn't have caused the kind of fear needed to create a myth at all. At that point, the argument stopped being just about water. It became something deeper, a question about memory itself. So now, we're left with two completely different trails. One leads deep beneath the Black Sea, to a drowned world frozen in time. The other points to a strange, structured shape buried inside a mountain that should be nothing but rock. But the most fascinating part isn't just the evidence. It's what happens when people are forced to take it seriously, because this stopped being just archaeology a long time ago. The moment those radar scans lit up that ridge in Turkey, everything changed. Faith, science, and history collided, and no one walked away untouched. For some, it felt like an old story, suddenly coming back to life. Not just a tale anymore, but something that might actually exist right now, hidden beneath the ground. For scientists, it was the opposite reaction. Excitement turned into caution. They questioned everything. Could rock mimic structure? Yes. Could soil mislead? Absolutely. And still, that formation refuses to behave like normal geology. Even experts have had to admit something unusual is there. Historians added another layer to the mystery. Maybe it's not about one ship at all. Nearly every ancient culture tells a flood story. Different names, different versions, same catastrophe. So maybe what we're seeing isn't a vessel, but the echo of a real event humanity never forgot. And while experts debate, the world reacts the way it always does. Some people dismiss it, others believe it, and many just can't stop wondering, because this isn't really about a boat. It's about survival, loss, and the idea that after everything is destroyed, life can begin again. That's why this mystery pulls people in, and it's not over yet. The drilling continues, the scans continue. The truth is still buried down there, waiting. So here's the question. If something truly is hidden beneath that mountain, what do you think it is?